Another aspect that can help us define great dynamic poses is to consider the weight of a character, its balance, and if it has any forces being acted on it. In 3D software, objects don't have physical weight. When we're posing our character, we're adding that physicality ourselves in the way we position the spine and the limbs. A great way of thinking about 3D meshes and characters is that they're very much like soap bubbles. They've got no physicality to them, and they're almost like ghosts as well, because they can interpenetrate different pieces of geometry as well. So positioning them is really important for us as an animator. A character's own weight can be a deciding factor on if the character is athletic or light or heavy, but we can also think about a character's weight as what happens when they're interacting with objects that are light or heavy. Now let's look at this pose that we've made for Kayla. She's holding out the sphere, which almost feels like a beach ball or a ball made out of light polystyrene. She's lifting it up with no effort. Notice that her limbs are mostly straight. There's no influence on her spine that the ball is causing any weight that causes her to bend over, and she really just has to make small adjustments to her hip and raise her arm out just to stay in balance. This makes the character feel light, and it's one of the big problems that beginners have when creating animation, which is that they're not aware of the body mechanics of how to make a character feel heavy or under the weight of a heavy object. A good way of describing a character's weight is to think about where the character's center of gravity is in every pose that we make. Sometimes animators will refer to this as the location of the cog. Now, the center of gravity doesn't have to just be a controller that some rigs have. It's actually a point on the body where the character's weight is actually distributed. It's almost like the center of balance, which normally would be for a normal character under no weight, just to be kind of like slightly above the hips, depending on their design. However, when you pick up a heavy object, the location of the center of gravity moves. In this case, Kayla's center of gravity will move up her body as she holds this very heavy sphere above her shoulders, almost in an atlas type of position. To make Kayla feel like she's under a heavy weight, we're going to take the pose and see that there is a greater variety between straights and curves through the body. The line of action isn't as smooth and clear, but actually bends in an S-type of shape. We can see that her weight has changed to share the weight on the balls of her feet, and she's keeping herself in balance by firmly planting her feet on the ground. Her knees bend, her spine squashes, even her expression on her face is squeezed and showing effort over here. Now again, this is an exaggerated pose, but while under the effect of weight, we can think about the body as a spring that is being compressed, and we want to put those compression lines and a good variation of straights and curves into the design, and that will make the character feel like they're being held under a weight. If you're struggling creating believable weight, you should always take up looking at good reference photos of athletes, weight trainers, or whichever subject you are trying to capture in your animations. If you still struggle with these poses, another thing you can do is also jump out of your chair and actually act out the pose. This is a great way to actually feel where the weight and balance is in a pose. Acting things out can be one of the best ways of figuring out how the weight changes and shifts between one pose and another. When a character's in a relaxed state, they will normally be in balance, and when we're in balance, we normally have an evenly distributed weight. Now, in this pose, we can see that we also have an evenly distributed weight, but thanks to the physicality of Kayla, she's actually holding up her entire weight on one leg. Now, usually the straight leg that we have in a pose will be carrying the weight, and here I'm just adding a slight bend to it to show that she's holding up a heavy weight of her upper torso. Notice how her chin goes in line with the leg, and she has to balance out her leg and her arm to keep her body in balance. Forces acted upon the character can be another aspect to take into consideration when designing dynamic poses. Most of these times, these will be internal forces driven by the character's own movement. When a character walks, they're exerting force through their muscles to move in a particular direction. But on other times, some forces can be external, when a character will be reacting to them. This can be like being punched when in combat, or being dragged along by something. Most of the time, you can reduce these to thinking about if the character is being pulled or pushed, and pose the character as opposing or following that main force. So we can see here that Kayla is under the influence of a force, which is a dog moving at high speed. Now, we can notice that there are some things similar to when we describe weight, which is that there is a nice variation between straights and curves in the body. We can see her legs are trying to oppose the movement and they're bent. We can see the upper body is more being pulled along by the force. If we were to draw this out, we could see that the main force runs from screen left to right. And we then can look at the rest of the body. If we drew the line of action going up through the legs, through the spine, it would go around the shoulders, through the arms, out the hands, and follow the same line that the main force is on. The legs would be bent, opposing the force by friction, and elements like the hair would just drag along as they are loose and have no will of their own. Now, by combining where the character's weight is, if they are or they're not in balance, and understanding if they're under the effects of any forces, we can start to design more dynamic type of poses. And it's important to write these things down and actually start thinking about them until they become second nature.